Oh my goodness. Hello, hello, hello. Hi, how are you? It has been so very long since I've sat down and talked to the camera, and this feels very weird. Look at my new mug. I got this at Powell's Books, and we are going to talk about it, but I'm obsessed with this mug. Look at it. It's a little octopus with a bunch of books, which is basically going to be me in this video. It was basically me on my trip. I thought it would be a little weird to kind of like hop back into the vlogging aspect and writing and all of that jazz without talking a little bit about my trip, which was so awesome. It was life-changing. The day that I got back from my trip, I took a nap and I pinched a nerve in my neck. So it has been a week of agony, of pain. I have been very, very frustrated. Something that you don't know about me is I struggle with a lot of pain in my body, and I have no idea where it comes from. I don't know why I suffer from it. I've been to many doctors, but essentially my joints hurt more than I feel like they should at my age. And the only way to prevent it is to work out regularly. And I'm usually great at that. Normally I do it. I don't have the privilege of not being able to work out. I have to work out in order to feel good in my body, literally to live without pain. And unfortunately, I haven't been able to work out because of my trip, because of stress, because of life things. And so, to be honest, I was kind of waiting for the ball to drop. The ball thankfully dropped after my trip. Is that the phrase? The ball dropped? I waited a week to film this video because I've just been resting, I've been reading, I've been icing, I've been on pain meds. I have slowly returned to moving my body and working out, and it is helping, but it just takes a long time. This video is going to be an April reading wrap-up, but I'm gonna integrate a little wrap-up on my trip. I thought that would be super fun. And I also want to talk about all the books that I bought because I bought a ton of books on this trip. So if you are not already cozy, get cozy. I'm gonna talk a lot about the West Coast. I'm gonna talk about books. It's gonna be great. Let's get into it. So for context, I live in Toronto. My husband and I flew to Vancouver, BC in Canada. We spent a couple days in Vancouver, and then we crossed the border via train to Seattle. And then we drove from Seattle all the way to LA, which was amazing. And then we flew from LA to Boston, more specifically to Salem, because my best friend got married. Oh my goodness, it was phenomenal. Quit my job, and I had 2 weeks to kill before my trip. And I have always wanted to read The Count of Monte Cristo. So I figured before a massive adventure, I would read about an adventure. I think I finished this book in a vlog and I talked a little bit about it, so I'm not going to talk too long about it, but first like half of this book was phenomenal. Easily 5 out of 5 for me. I loved the beginning of this book. I loved the writing. I loved the characters. Edmund is a book boyfriend of mine. I love him so deeply. However, the last bit of this book just went like this for me, and it really dragged on, and I'm so disappointed about that because I loved it so very much in the beginning, and it is a really, really long book. It just fell flat for me. The other book that I finished just before my trip, I listened to it while I was packing and while I was doing a really deep clean of my apartment, and that was My Dark Vanessa. I read this book because a good friend of mine, Allison, who watches my videos, hey Allison, my friend Allison read the book and really, really loved it, and she needed someone to talk to about it. And so I listened to the audiobook and I thought this book was phenomenal. I'll say up front, read the Goodreads page, read all of the content warnings because it follows a story between a student and a relationship with a teacher. It is an abusive relationship. It is a horrific story to listen to, but I thought it was done really, really well. I really enjoyed the writing. It's actually kind of difficult for me to judge writing when I'm listening to the audiobook because so much of audiobooks are wrapped up in the performance of the voice actor, and I find that I focus less on the actual phrasing and syntax of the words on the page, obviously, when I am listening to the audiobook. When I'm listening to an audiobook, I tend to just fall into the story a little bit more, which is why I tend to only listen to like thrillers and rom-coms via audio, because I find that those books don't necessarily need to be written perfectly. it was really hard to read. It wasn't an easy read, but it was done really well, and I found that it was nuanced, and I appreciated that. So ultimately, I gave that book 4 to 5 stars. It was probably my favorite book this month, maybe. I think that's fair to say. We'll see. I don't know. I read some other good ones, but let's dive into the trip. My little baby Kobo, look at how cute she is. She's adorable. She is wonderful. She's everything I want in this world. She's so tiny and she's yellow. Fun fact about me, I am terrified of flying. Really hate getting on a plane. I will always get on a plane though. It will never hold me back in life, but I'm very scared of it. Very scared of it. I struggle a lot to focus when I'm on a plane. Obviously, I can't really do anything but just sit there and wait for it to be over, basically. And the flight from Toronto to Vancouver is about 5 hours long, so I had to pick really easy books that I could just get into and read and enjoy and like not have to think too hard about. So I actually picked up a fantasy series that I've wanted to read for a really long time, that I've had the first book on my shelf for a long time, and I want to read all of them. I'm really excited to read all of them. I don't know when I'm going to be able to read all of them because I'm not buying any more books, but it was really fun. And that is His Majesty's Dragon by Naomi Novik. This is a fantasy book that takes place during the Napoleonic. Wow, that word was hard for me to say. During the Napoleonic Wars. However, it's reimagined with dragons. And we follow our main character, Lawrence, who is a soldier on a ship who, through a battle with another ship, acquires a dragon egg. And that dragon egg is hatched, and out comes this dragon named Temeraire, who picks him to be his rider, which means he has to change his service from the Navy to basically the Dragon Air Force. Thus begins their adventure together. As I said, it's set during wartime, so there was some pretty awesome like action scenes with dragons. I really enjoyed it. It was a really good book, but it definitely felt like the first book of a series. Like it was just a little taste of the rest of the story, and so it's hard for me to really rate it because in so many ways it felt like an introduction. So I guess if you're not really into that, if you like your books to feel more like standalones, then it probably wouldn't be the best book to read. However, I am so down to follow the rest of their adventures, and it was kind of fun reading about flying dragons while I was on an airplane. It kind of helped me get out of my head a little bit. I actually made a point in my journal to write every single day all the things that we did, because we packed in so much in our 2 weeks that I just can't even begin to fathom all that I saw and all of the memories that we created and just all of the wondrous things that we experienced. I could talk about it for forever. This could turn into a very long video, and I'm just going to try to keep to like the highlights of every city and also ground them in the books that I read and the books that I bought in each city, because otherwise this could get very, very long. The very first thing that we experienced on our trip was flying over the Rocky Mountains, and oh my goodness, I will never forget that moment. It was phenomenal. It was such a clear view of them, and it was the first time I think ever on a plane that I like forgot about my fear, because it was so, so beautiful. We landed in Vancouver and it rained basically for our entire trip, just a heads up. The only time we saw the sun was in LA, and it was like still a very unclear day, but it's fine. We still had a great time. It always rains whenever we do things like camping and stuff like that, so we usually have a pretty good attitude about it, but it was pouring rain the entire time. It's also the West Coast, so like we were expecting rain. We went in expecting rainy weather. Totally fine. We were prepared. I had a raincoat, we had umbrellas, we had waterproof shoes. It was fine. Vancouver, we did all of the major touristy things because we only had 2 days. We went to Granville Island, we walked through Stanley Park, we enjoyed the view on the waterfront. We sat and we had our coffees and our breakfast donuts and watched the mountains, and it was so, so amazing. The mountains. I want to go back to the mountains so badly. It was a beautiful city, and we fell hard. We fell hard in love. We crossed the water on the sea bus, and we walked through a suspension bridge, and it was just wonderful. And I bought a lot of books on this trip, so I'm gonna try really hard to remember all of the books that I bought in each city. I might get things wrong. no one's gonna know but me, and that's gonna be fine. So I bought Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. I have not read Virginia Woolf yet. My summer TBR includes To the Lighthouse, and I just have really, really good feelings about Virginia Woolf. I think her and I are gonna get along really, really well, so I decided to buy another one of hers. This is also an Oxford World Classic, which I love those Oxford editions. They look so pretty on my shelves. I love the white spine with the little pop of red, and so I thought it was perfect when I found it on the shelf. After Vancouver, we went to Seattle. Seattle, if I could describe Seattle, I would describe it as an uncut gem. We really enjoyed aspects of Seattle, but the entire time we were there, and it was only 2 days, we didn't have very long, so like none of the cities I judged too harshly, because like how can you judge a city by only being there for a couple of days? However, with Seattle, we just like didn't quite know how to feel about it. We went to the Pike Marketplace. We saw this amazing old used bookstore. Actually, at the marketplace, we randomly saw Keith from the Try Guys. We didn't say hi because we're both way too introverted for that, but it was so random that we saw him there. It was so crazy. And yeah, we walked to Kerry Park and we walked all through the downtown core. We didn't do any of the museums or anything, but the highlight of Seattle for me was definitely Elliott Bay Books. Oh my god, this was probably the best bookstore I have ever been in. That's really hard to say. I'm thinking of Powell's. However, Elliott Bay just took my breath away. I think my head exploded. We spent 2 days in Seattle and we went to that store both days because I was just absolutely obsessed. We're talking tall beams, wooden paneling, and just books, endless books. But I think my favorite part about that bookstore was the staff picks were just so on point with everything that I love that again my head completely exploded, and it was really hard not to buy a lot of books. Did end up buying 2 books from that bookstore though, so let's talk about that ever so briefly. I'm just grabbing them. One of them was a book that I've wanted to read for a really long time. This is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. So I actually just finished this book today. I've read it all week, and I wanted to read this book because I really, really loved The Night Circus. One of my favorite books. I think she just has the most beautiful writing and the most beautiful storytelling, and The Night Circus took me by surprise because I don't often like to read books that are written like the way she writes The Night Circus, because I find that it's really hard to connect to the characters. I find that it's almost all story and whimsy and not a whole lot of like emotional impact, but The Night Circus just balanced that so well, and I was sold. I was sold on Morgenstern's writing. I loved it. So I wanted to read The Starless Sea, but it was only available in hardcover for the longest time. So I randomly stumbled upon the trade paperback and was like, I'm buying this. I want to buy this. This is impossible to explain. Fresh off of finishing it, and I loved the first 140-ish pages, and after that, it just lost me. And I think it's because it is a very condensed, convoluted story about stories, and I appreciate what this story was trying to do, and I appreciate what this story could do for so many people who are probably a lot smarter than I am and who probably can follow stories like this and not be confused because that's basically what I was. This is a story about a university student who loves books, who essentially stumbles upon this book that he sees a part of his life in the book. He reads a part of his life in this book, and that leads him to stumble upon this underground world that is essentially a world of stories. It's very high concept, and that sounds amazing. And again, the first 150 pages of this book were amazing. My issue with this book is that it had so many mysteries and it was so branched, and every chapter was essentially a new story, and I thought that it would all come together in a very satisfying way, and I found it just didn't. It just kept being more and more mysterious, and I find that after a while with stories, if you're not going to give me answers, I'm not going to be as attached as I want to be. The one good thing I will say about this book versus The Night Circus is that I felt for our main character, Zachary, a lot more than I did for the main characters in The Night Circus, which is funny. I can't even really remember their names. That's how like disconnected I was to them as characters. But Zachary was a wonderful character, and I really felt for him almost immediately. I felt like I knew him and understood him. But again, it was kind of lost towards the end. So kind of a bummer, but I'm really glad that I bought this book at this beautiful bookstore, and I will forever cherish the memory of that bookstore. And I also got a little bookmark that I'm actually gonna hang on my wall. As I said, we spent 2 days in Seattle, and one of those days we actually had to check out of our Airbnb, and then we had almost an entire afternoon before we picked up our rental car to start our official road trip. So we decided to go back to the bookstore because we'd kind of seen everything that we thought we should see in Seattle, and we kept saying we wish that we like had a local to show us around, because I feel like if we had a local, it just would have been a lot better. We would have seen a lot more, I think, of the city than just like the typical tourist things. Anyway, we went to the bookstore and we sat all day and we read at the cafe. And again, I loved this bookstore so much. And what I read was Bunny. I really liked this book. It was a ride. It was such a ride. And do I think it's worth the hype? I don't know. I don't think I could properly answer that because I don't think I know what the hype is. I'm not on TikTok, but I thought it was fantastic. It was a very, very interesting read. It was well done. It was funny. It was creepy. It was eerie. It reminded me of like Heather's meets I'm Thinking of Ending Things. That's what it felt like for me. It was just this crazy ride and you didn't really know what was going on. And I really enjoyed it because I needed books like that to read on this trip to just like immerse me in this story, and it did the job greatly. I think I liked everything except one thing that happens at the end, which obviously I'm not going to spoil, but there was just one choice that the author made that I didn't really understand why this choice was made. It was kind of a bummer. Didn't love that part, but really, really glad read that at probably my favorite bookstore in the whole wide world. So as I was saying about this amazing bookstore, the Elliott Bay Book Company, they had these amazing like staff recommendations, and there were so many of them, and like honestly their entire catalog was just like, I want all of the books that they were showcasing. It was exactly my type of bookstore. Oh, I just loved it so much. Anyway, this is a long-winded way of saying this is the second book, and I picked this one up because it was actually a staff recommendation and it sounded so good on the blurb. This is Beasts of a Little Land, and essentially this is set in the snowy mountains of South Korea in 1917. Follow an impoverished local hunter on the brink of starvation who saves a young Japanese officer from a tiger attack, instantly connecting their fates in a saga that spans half a century. It unveils a world where friends become enemies, enemies become saviors, heroes are prosecuted, and beasts take many shapes. So this is a debut novel, and it sounds like a little bit of historical fiction, maybe even some magical realism in there, and I love books that are set in Korea, so I'm really, really excited to read this. And I also just really love the cover. So in between Seattle and Portland, we stayed at this old historic inn called McMinian's. It's this old building from like a century ago that used to be a gentleman's club, whatever that means, I don't know. It's been restored, but it's still kept in the old style, and we actually went to a movie in the movie theater, which again is like an old style movie theater. We had burgers and we watched the Mario Brothers movie, which we both just thought was like, okay, not really a whole lot of plot to it, didn't love that, but everything else was so wonderful. And it was so cool staying in this building because we were walking through and we just felt the history and the weight of the history and like all of the things that happened in this pub, which we don't know what, but it was so cool. It was such an experience. So then we woke up the next day and we drove into Portland. And at this point, unfortunately, Tom was not feeling the best, so we didn't get up to a whole lot in Portland. However, we did the main thing. We did the most important thing, which was Powell's City of Books. I knew I was gonna love Powell's. I knew I was gonna love it. Of course I was gonna love it. But I was just not expecting to love it as much as we did. We walked in, I immediately got overwhelmed. We stayed for a couple hours and I had to leave. I literally had to leave because I was like, I can't take this anymore. I'm feeling way too much. One of the things that I tried to do on this trip, but I don't think I was entirely successful, is pick books that would evoke memories of this trip. So I was doing a lot of research about books set in the Pacific Northwest and set in the various cities that I was going to, and one of these books that came up was literally on Powell's websites and the list that was books set in the Pacific Northwest, and that is Glaciers by Alexis M. Smith. This is essentially about a day in the life of a young woman living in Portland. And that's basically it. It is set over a single day. The formatting of it is really interesting. But what's really cool is that the young woman who is our main character, Isabel, actually restores old books in the basement of a library, which is like one of the things that if I get to do that in my life would just be a dream come true. That sounds like the coolest job. It sounds like the perfect job for me. It's maybe what I'm trying to eventually do with my life. I don't know. We'll see if I get there. But I figured that this book, whether or not the format works for me or whether or not I like it, will just always be a perfect memory of Portland, Oregon, and of Powell's books. And it really kind of feels like it's like a book that I should love. So this is actually the book I think I'm going to read next, now that I finished The Starless Sea. The next book that I got at Powell's has actually been on my reading list for a long time. This is Austerlitz. It's basically a historical fiction set around a young man's life. A young Jewish boy is sent to England, I believe. Yes, he's sent to England in 1939 as a part of the effort to save Jewish children from Nazi Germany. And he's told nothing about his childhood by the family that adopts him. He knows nothing about his history, and it essentially follows his life. So it's been on my to-read list for a while, and I found it used. It was pretty cheap, I think. Yeah, it was $10 US. So I picked it up. That was a spontaneous buy, but I'm really glad that I found it used because I've been looking for it everywhere in Canada and have not been able to find it. The last book that I bought at Powell's is a book that I bought new because I'm really excited to read it. I'm so excited to read it. This is Lonely Castle in the Mirror. I have recently discovered Allison Pages on YouTube. I love her channel. She has been like my fixation for the past few weeks. She has kept me so much company, and whenever I discover a new booktuber, I always try to like read their favorite books to like get the vibe of the type of books that they like, and also just like find new books that I love. And she read this book and she loved it, and it sounds so whimsical and delightful and fun and heart-wrenching. This is essentially about a young bullied girl who goes to school in a fairy tale like castle with 6 other students, and in this school slash castle there's a single room that grants them one wish. It just sounds so fantastic. It sounds heart-wrenching. It says, with the thoughtful whimsy of Before the Coffee Gets Cold, the exquisite textures of A Tale for the Time Being, and the youthful resonance of Your Name, Lonely Castle in the Mirror paints an intricate portrait of a cycle of loneliness that can only be broken by friendship, empathy, and sacrifice. I don't know if you can hear my cat snoring, but he's snoring in the cutest little kitty way. So I'm really excited to read this. I had to buy it new. From then on, we didn't really buy any other books, but I still want to take you through what we did because it was so cool. We went, woke up the next morning and we went to Mount St. Helens. We got as far as we possibly could, but the drive started to get really dicey, which we frankly were expecting because it's April in the Pacific Northwest and we were literally driving up a mountain. So we went from the most beautiful views of trees and forests and like over these grand bridges, and oh my god, it was amazing. And then it just started getting really snowy, really slippery, and the road was really windy. So we basically gave up, cut our losses, and the drive from Portland to California, all throughout this beautiful state of Oregon, is a drive that I will probably never forget. We woke up early and I just couldn't believe what we saw. Like the most beautiful trees, the most beautiful dense forests. Again, we were on like these winding roads for stretches of like 8 hours. We drove for 8 hours, and then we hit the coast, and the coast just like smacked you in the face with its beauty, these like large jagged rocks, the blue ocean. We got out, we laughed, we like screamed at the ocean. It was just amazing. Of course we'd seen the ocean the entire time, but I think it was just the view, just like, oh, it was amazing. We found just like a random place to stay, and then woke up the next day and we drove to the Avenue of the Giants. Oh my God, the Avenue of the Giants was like a highlight for both me and Tom. These massive, massive trees that have just been around for centuries and histories, and were taken care of by indigenous folks long before colonizers came in and tried to destroy everything. And it just was so, so beautiful. And we started the morning there, and then because we had time to kill, we were like, oh, let's drive to Point Reyes, which was ultimately kind of a bad idea because it made the day even more exhausting, because again, we're driving on these super windy coastal roads, and we didn't even make it all the way up. I mean, we did make it all the way up to Point Reyes, but we didn't even stop because it was jam-packed. It was such a beautiful view, and I don't think I got any pictures of it because we didn't even stop the car. Tom was starting to feel really uncomfortable with the heights and with all of the cars around, so we turned right back around, and we ended up in San Francisco. San Francisco stole my heart on this trip. I can't believe we were only there for a single day, but that day I fell in love so hard. We had the best burrito. At this point, we were so exhausted, beyond exhausted, more exhausted than I think I've ever been, and we really were struggling, but we got to do a tour of Alcatraz. All the way leading up to that tour, though, we did not want to go on. We were just so spent. But I'm so glad that we powered through and we went to Alcatraz, because Alcatraz was definitely a highlight. Again, there's so many highlights, but it was kind of sad. The tour ended on a really sad note, but it was really, really important to be there and to see this part of history that isn't actually history, that still affects prisons across the world today. The birds were really, really cool. It was just a really neat, cool tour, and I am glad that we did that. We decided to cut our stay in San Francisco short because we were really enjoying the nature driving and seeing more of the coast, and we didn't want to have to power through at the rate that we had been, because we were talking like 2 full days of driving. Like, we decided to make our time between San Francisco and LA a little bit longer instead of just staying in the city and then driving through. So we decided to wake up the next day and continue driving, and I'm so glad we did, because we stayed in this gorgeous little place called Morro Bay, which I will never forget, because we had the best dinner right on the water in this cozy little restaurant with a bunch of locals. That's the other part about this trip that was amazing, was because it was in April, we had basically all of these places to ourselves. It was not jam-packed because it wasn't quite summer, and that just felt really special. And so we got to see these places before the tourists kind of came, and like we were filled and surrounded with people, which was really sweet. At Morro Bay, we saw sea lions and sea otters, and we walked around this massive rock there. It was so cool. We also saw Hearst Castle, which was amazing. The view was amazing. I mean, the rich opulence wasn't really my thing. Don't really love the super wealthy, but glad I saw it. That was neat. We also saw a bunch of sea lions on a beach, which was really fun. Oh, after Morro Bay, we went to Solvang, which in Solvang, actually, I bought another book. There's this cute little bookstore in Solvang, and we wanted to kind of commemorate our time. This book has actually been on my list for a really long time, and I thought that it perfectly encapsulates my trip and the trees, and that is The Overstory by Richard Powers. This is the winner of the Pulitzer Prize. I find Pulitzer Prize winners often, you know what, we changed lighting. The sun is coming in and out, so hopefully the lighting is still okay. I tend to really like the winners of Pulitzer Prizes. This is a book that is set against nature. The blurb on the back literally says, the best novel about trees, which, like, hello. I love trees. I'm gonna love reading about trees. And a part of this trip, such a big part of this trip, was seeing all of the trees, all of the different types of trees, all of the nature. It was phenomenal. And so I felt like this book that apparently reads like a fable set in nature would be a really great reminder of my time on the West Coast. Part of this book is also set in the Pacific Northwest, because like obviously how couldn't it be? It's about trees, and there are some massive trees there. So I'm really excited to dive into this. I think I'm gonna add it to my summer TBR because I feel like this is the perfect book that you want to read outside under a tree. And it was so fun to kind of commemorate that little chunk of the trip with a book. And Solvang was really cute. I really enjoyed that stretch. We went to Santa Barbara. We saw the jail, or not the jailhouse, the courthouse in Santa Barbara. We walked along the beach, which was really cool. We got amazing tacos. Unfortunately, the only tacos that we got on the trip, I know that's crazy. I feel like the part of this trip that we really let ourselves down was the food, but that was just because we were just going, and like we didn't have time to really sit and eat a whole lot. And so that's the only bummer. There was a ton of places that we wanted to try that we ended up not going to, but Tom got his In-N-Out burger. We got our donuts, we got our burritos, we got our tacos. We're pretty jazzed about that. After that, we drove through Malibu, and then we finally got to our Airbnb, which would be our last Airbnb on the West Coast, and that was in Burbank. Honestly, we got there, we ate spaghetti, and we watched Nope, and we spent the night sleeping. The best sleep ever. LA was fantastic. I didn't buy any books in LA because at that point we were just like enjoying the vibes, you know? We didn't actually end up going to the last bookstore because it was a little bit out of our way, and we wanted to have a day where we went to Joshua Tree, which I'll talk about in a second, because first I will say that we went to Griffith Park and we saw the observatory. That was really cool. We got a great view of the city. We went through the Hollywood Walk of Fame, which I didn't take any video of. And then we went to see a movie at Universal Studios. We saw Renfield, and Renfield was phenomenal. It was such a funny movie. Loved it. It was also just really cool being in a studio. And we were also in the recliner seats, which was really badass. Then we went to Joshua Tree. Joshua Tree will be etched in my mind for eternity. One of the things in my life that I never really wanted, that I never really thought that I wanted, was to like see a desert landscape, but now that I've seen one, I have fallen so deep in love with it. It is so beautiful. It is so beautiful in a different way than I thought. And this trip is so impossible to comprehend because we literally started with snowy capped mountains and rain and mist and sea, and then we went through all the way to the desert that was blooming. There was flowers and these tall rocks, and then again in the distance these snow-capped mountains. It was phenomenal. It was awe-inspiring. It was something that I will never forget because I didn't think that I would fall in love with the desert, and I did, and I'm so grateful for that. It was phenomenal. It was worth the drive. The drive was terrible out there, but it was really, really worth the drive. The next day was our last day in LA, and we had to drop off the car before taking an overnight flight, so we didn't really know how to spend our day. But Tom had the idea of going to the Getty Museum, which I'm so glad that he did. We saw Lilies by Van Gogh, which was amazing. That was just a gem of a surprise. For the past couple months, I've been really craving walking around an art museum, so seeing some masterful art and spending the day at a museum before a really long flight was phenomenal. Lilies took my breath away. I also kind of fell in love with Degas, which I wasn't expecting. I didn't think that I was like an impressionist person. I don't know a whole lot about art, and I feel like I'm sounding like I do. I don't really know a lot about art, but I do like looking at it. I do like the feelings it puts in my body when I look at it. So I fell in love with Degas, but did some research after the fact, found out that he's kind of a bummer of a person, kind of a jerk, and I'm bummed about that, but I did end up getting a little postcard of painting of his, which I had to display because like I did love the art museum and I did love this part of the trip, and that's kind of my souvenir. I also got a beautiful metal bookmark that is inspired by Lilies by Van Gogh, and oh, it is beautiful and I love it, and I've been using it nonstop. And then I also got a little portrait of Poe to hang up next to my Powell's bookmark, which, how perfect is this bookmark for this trip? It is literally all of the landscapes that I got to see on this trip, and it says never lose your place, which is such a good reminder for me in this next stretch of my life, and so very important. So after this, we flew to Salem. Well, we flew into Boston overnight, and I'm not gonna lie to you, it was exhausting. This was probably the hardest part of the trip for me. I spent the day walking around Salem in a haze. I was so exhausted that I cried multiple times. I just wanted to go to bed, but we couldn't check in until 3. But we did see the memorial, we saw the House of Seven Gables, we walked through all of the town, and that's basically how we spent our last 2 days, was visiting the sights of Salem, getting to see my best friend get married, which was such a special day. And one of the things that I did end up surprise buying, which I wasn't expecting, was a Nathaniel Hawthorne book, The House of Seven Gables. We didn't actually walk through the house because the tour was really, really expensive, and we opted to do the witch house instead, which was really cool and a lot cheaper. However, when I read what this book was about, because we were doing research on the house, I was like, this is a book that sounds phenomenal. I really want to read it. So, of course, the bookshop there, which is called Wicked Good Books, and I'm grabbing the little bookmark because it is so cute. It is a cat reading a book. Hello. Hello. They sold this book there, which I think is kind of obvious that they would, because I feel like a lot of people would walk through the house and want to read it. That's my only regret, is that I obviously am not I didn't get to see a house that was inspired by this. However, I'm really excited to read this. This is essentially a psychological drama that follows a family who lived for generations under a dead man's curse and then is finally exorcised by love. It is a gothic book that I've heard, or that Tom read, that inspired the works of H.P. Lovecraft. So I think it sounds really neat, and I'm really excited to read it. And then we just spent the last night dancing the night away at my best friend's wedding, which was, again, another highlight. It was so special. And that's it. That's all she wrote. That was my trip. It's so much. And if you've made it this far, thank you for caring. I hope that it was worth it. I hope that you got to see some of the pretty shots that I took. I'm going to be thinking about this trip for a really long time. It was so immensely life-changing and wonderful, and it taught me so many things about myself. I learned how exhausted I could get but still power through. I learned that things that you think won't inspire you will inspire you. I learned that Tom and I can do hard things together and not fight. And yeah, it was just a wonderful, wonderful trip. And of course, it has inspired my writing immensely. And I'm sure we're going to talk about that in the next vlog. I am starting school next week, which means nothing to you. I guess it does mean something to you because this is coming out on Saturday, but I'm starting school, so I've decided to switch up my upload schedule to Saturdays because I don't know how much time I'm gonna have to edit throughout the week, and I just want to give myself as much time as possible. So this is the first video that's coming out on Saturday. They will come out on that day henceforth. And yes, thank you so much for being here, and until next time.